This mic is now on. Good morning. Welcome to the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments meeting for Thursday, October 19th. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll?
Thank you, Chair Osborne. For the roll call, Directors Williams.
Director Williams. Here.
Here.
Capps.
Here.
Hartman.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Levanino.
Here.
Infante.
Here.
Julian. King.
Here.
Hernandez. Richards.
Here.
Clark.
Here.
Rouse. And Chair Osborne.
And here.
All right. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Item number 3 is public comment. The public may address the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments on any subject within the jurisdiction of the board that is not included as part of this agenda. Comments shall be limited to no more than 15 minutes divided among those desiring to speak, but no person shall speak longer than 3 minutes. Madam Clerk, do we have any requests for public comment either here or online?
Chair Osborne, we have no request for public comment here or online.
Santa Barbara, are there any requests for public comment in your location?
No request for public comment in Santa Barbara.
Thank you very much. So we will close public comment and move on to item 4, consent calendar. I do know that there is a request for a 4G to be continued, so that motion will be included in the approval of the consent calendar. Is there any public comment on consent calendar?
Chair Osborne, I have no request for public comment here or online.
Is there any requests for consent calendar public comment in Santa Barbara?
No, there's none.
All right. Is there an item that any of the directors would like to pull? Director Nelson? No. All right. I saw you ready to push a button, and I was...
I'm usually pushing buttons, but
yes,
not
absolutely. Was that to make a motion?
As long as the Santa Barbara doesn't have anybody to pull, I'm happy to make a motion to approve the consent items
With the 4G motion to continue.
with the 4G motion to continue, of course.
All right. Santa
Second.
Barbara, were there any items to be pulled by you?
I'm seeing none.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second by Director Infante. Roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Director Williams.
Aye.
Capps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Levanino.
Aye.
Infante.
Aye.
Julian. Absent. King.
No to 4, D, and F, and yes for those.
Should we do separate motions for those?
I'll go ahead and amend my motion to remove 4D and F. Is that right, Mr. Infante? If we
I'll second that amended motion.
okay, want to
Thank
start
you
over?
for the amendment, and we are pulling 4D and F for a separate vote.
Okay. Okay, so we're still on consent without 4D and 4F.
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna do roll over since there was a little interruption there. Okay, we're gonna go again. Director Williams.
Aye.
Capps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Levanino.
Aye.
Infante.
Aye.
Julian. Absent. King.
Aye.
Hernandez. Aye. Richards.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Rouse.
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
And now we will do 4D and F.
4D and F. Director King, can you make sure you turn your mic on? They can't hear you down in Santa Barbara. Thank you. The motion was for 4D and F, Director Nelson. Did you make the motion?
I think he's pulled it. I believe Director King's pulled it. 4D, do you want to make any comments before, or just want a roll call?
We just do a roll call.
Okay, so I will make a motion to approve item 4D.
Do you want to do both 4D and F?
If we can, and F.
And I will second.
Okay, for a roll call. This is for item 4D and 4F. Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Levanino?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian F. and King?
No.
Hernandez? Aye. Richards?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 11-1.
All right. Just a brief announcement. Evidently, we are having a great shakeout drill at 10:19 a.m. So if we are suddenly interrupted, that is why. Just to give everyone the heads up. Right? All right, moving on to 5A. Please read into the record.
Thank you. 5A, options for sub-allocation of State Senate Bill 125 transit and rail funding for eligible projects in Santa Barbara County. 5A1, receive presentation on availability of State Senate Bill 125 rail and transit funding and sub-allocation options. 5A2, provide direction to SBCAG staff on sub-allocation options for selection of projects for SB 125 funding.
Thank you, Chair Osborne, Directors. Good morning, Sarkis Kachek with SBCAG. We do have a slide deck this morning that was also included as an attachment and emailed this morning. Next slide, please. So today we have good news. We have an infusion of a significant amount of state funding for rail and transit. I think that's the South Coast. That's not me.
Is
Okay.
there, I'm sorry, Circus.
Yes.
Madam Chair, is there a way to ask Santa Barbara? I don't know. I think that whole room is on a microphone.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
there's some feedback going on that's making it really difficult. So I don't know if we can get Santa Barbara to mute and see if that solves it.
There should be. They speed it.
Let's go ahead and see if it's solved the problem.
Okay, thank you. So we have good news. We have an infusion of money coming to our region that we'd like to work with our partners on selecting projects. We did provide your board with an update in August on this and have been working with partners since then. But today, now that we have the final guidelines from the state on the funding and we've identified some sub-allocation options with our partners, we would like direction from your board today on how to select those projects. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's an extraordinary amount of money that was included in the state budget, one-time funding at about $5 billion. This is funding that our transit partners through the California Transit Association, as well as SBCAG through our different respective advocacy groups advocated for. And so the funding is for transit and rail projects, and it is the responsibility for selection of projects. Administration is delegated to regional transportation agencies like SBCAG. And so we have been working with our partners on the process so far the last couple months, and so we have more information for your board today. Next slide, please. So this is the legislative intent, including in Senate Bill 125. This is one-time funding. It's to help transit operators that experienced cuts during COVID, but it's also looking at ways to improve rail and transit throughout California. And so one thing I did want to highlight was through the guidelines process, this funding that we're receiving from the state is also eligible as a match for a state competitive program that's coming up. And so that's something we wanted, we did notice in the guidelines, and so that's something that we wanted to highlight today. Next slide, please. The funding is coming to us through two programs. The first program is the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. This is a program that does exist already at the state, and it's administered by the California State Transportation Agency. And SBCAG and our partners have been successful in the competitive process in prior cycles. There is also a brand new program that was created called the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program, and this program is focused more on the purchase of electric buses and rail, as well as the charging infrastructure for them. While there were draft guidelines shared by the state over the months of August and September, the final guidelines were provided in September, so we know for sure what is included and what the eligibility and the roles and responsibilities are for everyone. Next slide, please. So this is the breakdown of the 5.1 billion in funding statewide. The significant portion is in the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, which is $4 billion over the first 2 years. And then the rest of the money is coming through the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program over a 4-year period. Next slide, please. In terms of the breakdown for our county, you can see typically we represent 1% of the state's population, and so the funding is coming that way. And the $45 million of the funding is going to be available over 2 years through the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, and then the rest of the funding is through the Zero Emission Program. In total, we will have $53.1 million available. Through the program, 1% can be used for administration. There's significant reporting involved with the program, and so SBCAG staff is recommending the 1% for administration. And then the balance will be available for projects countywide. Next slide, please. So what is the board's role? What we're sharing with you today is consideration of how to use the funding for projects. There are needs countywide, which we've provided in the staff report. We surveyed all of our partners on that, and so you have the whole universe in front of you. There are significant needs for operations and capital, so we wanted to highlight that. We worked with the partners on various sub-allocation options, so that's presented in the staff report, so we'd like to get your direction on that today. And then once we have that direction, we'll work with the partners on selection of projects and then come back to your board in December before we submit the list to the state. Next slide, please. So this is a table that was included in the staff report. It's an overview of the needs countywide for all eligible SB 125 funding. And so they're broken down into different categories, from transit operations and capital to rail. Another category that's eligible is grade crossing improvements. And so whenever there's a project that meets Union Pacific Railroad to improve crossings there, those projects are eligible. And then we also surveyed operators due to the significant amount of money if there's any transformative projects. And so that's something that we heard from the city of Santa Maria with bus rapid transit that's currently not in existence within the city as an eligible project. In total, the needs outweigh the available funding 3 to 1. And so now we're looking for the direction on the options. The other opportunity, though, I mentioned under the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program is that we could use some of this money to leverage additional money through the competitive program to help meet the countywide needs. Next slide, please. These are the options that we presented to the transit and rail partners. A lot of these are traditional ways of distributing transit money, either at the state level or local level. But first one would be a needs basis. That would be doing a guidelines process and scoring criteria to select projects. The other one is allocating funding to previously funded projects through the competitive program. And then the next set are the traditional ones using population, fare box revenues reported to the state, what the annual ridership is by transit partner or a hybrid. Of those 3 above, Back a couple years ago, your board did adopt a policy on other state transit programs called the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program and the State of Good Repair Program. Those were newer programs back then. The transit partners requested and your board approved a split of 45% to North County projects, 45% to South County, and 10% to regional projects like Rail, Cleaner Express, and Coastal Express. And then the other opportunity is to use the funds as a match. This is the menu. The other option is you can do a hybrid of any of these options as well. Next slide, please. For the next competitive cycle, the guidelines are expected to be released on December 1st. So we'll have an idea, but they should be similar to prior cycles. Applications will be due in the spring, and then we'll know which projects were selected in June of 2024. One option that we did talk to the transit partners about was we know there are needs countywide, but the option of maybe taking 10% off the top of the $54 million, using that as a match to leverage for the competitive program to include a suite of projects from our county. We're calling it the SBCAG regional application. If the funding is, if we find out in June that we didn't get the money, then we would come back to your board on options to distribute that money again. So it's like, how do you, if we don't get, if the $5 million that we take off the top doesn't get us funding back, then we'll bring back the $5 million and talk about distribution back to everybody. Next slide, please. So SBCAG staff, based on the needs that we saw submitted by the partners, these are options for projects to include in the regional application to the state. This covers local needs as well as regional needs, as well as the grade separation improvement projects. So this would include North County projects as well as South Coast and regional projects as well. Next slide, please. So that's background. We met with partners a couple times to talk about this. The transit partners did express preference to use the framework for the low carbon transit operations state of good repair program, or the 45-45-10 split. And so that's what we want to present to your board today. We did, as I mentioned, talk about taking the 10% off the top. There wasn't a recommendation for that, but there also wasn't opposition to it either. We do have transit partners online too, so they can also communicate that to you. But SBCAG's staff's idea is that if we have so much need, if we just take a little bit and show the state that we have skin in the game, we could potentially leverage more money into our county. And if we don't get it, then we'll work with everybody on redistributing. Next slide, please. So in terms of the timeline, we are presenting options to your board today. Once we get your feedback and direction on that, we're already going to meet with the partners in a couple weeks to talk about what projects we will include to submit to the state for the formula money. We will come back to your board then in December for approval, and then that'll get submitted to the state by the December 31st deadline. The state will then review the submittal and then approve it, and then we have received confirmation that the funding will come to our county by April of next year. Next slide, please. So that concludes the staff presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
So it is officially 10:19, which means we are supposed to do the great shakeout drill, which, if anyone needs reminders, is to drop, cover, and hold. Okay. So let's all drop, cover, and hold briefly. If you can get to the floor.
Yeah, getting back up is the problem.
It's the getting back up.
Yeah.
I like it down here.
Yeah, no, it's nice.
Should we do the meeting after?
That's fine.
Like that. The process of getting back up is really what's going to take us all the longest. So, all right. They're electing to continue their meeting on the ground. They're taking proof of the fact that they participated. Oh, my knees are not happy.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone for doing their great shakeout drill. And now we will resume our regularly planned agenda. I believe there were potential questions.
Oh, the regular.
Director Nelson, was that you that
It was,
started? All
yeah.
right.
Thank you, Chair Osborne. Getting back to the rail component, as we're examining this, the rail countywide, I know the emphasis has been on transit. Has there been any discussions about trying to take advantage of some of the commercial opportunities within rail? I mean, there's a lot of history in the Santa Maria Valley, the Santa Maria Valley Railroad, for moving large products to and from. That would potentially take a lot of large vehicles off the road. Also, could be an economic driver for the Santa Maria Valley in North County. Is that part of these discussions at all with any of this funding?
That's a great question, Director Nelson. I'm going to lean on my rail and transit director to help answer that question.
All right. So in short, yes, the TIRCIP, or Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, can be leveraged to improve the corridor functionality for passenger rail services, which in turn open up capacity for freight and other programs. So directly, no, it's not within the guidelines for freight-specific projects. There is the TCEP program, which is a competitive program on, I believe, a biannual basis,
Yes.
Which does look at freight improvement specifically. But with regard to TIRCIP, its focus is on passenger rail, but there is evidence throughout the various awards that that it can be leveraged to improve on the freight side.
Okay. And does SBCAG go after those TCIP funds?
So through the chair, currently, while we seek to complete the Santa Barbara US 101 corridor, we have been submitting for the Highway 101 corridor for TCEP. And so that would be another program that we would look to for completion of the corridor. And then after that, we could work on submitting applications to TCEP for the Santa Maria Valley Railroad. But it would be an important program right now for us to get the last funding piece for the 101 project.
Okay, because here's my concern with what I'm hearing from you is that it seems like the focus off in SBCAG is regionally means completing the 101 and all the plans that were associated with that before we come back up north and start to seek improvements up here. And so I know that the $140 million off the top, let's go ahead and get the the 101 widening done, which has turned into $1 billion, which has not allowed the North County and other parts of the county to competitively access funds for nearly a decade. And so I understand that the rail component is a really important part of the overall plan for the county, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't continue on that, but I do think we should be doing that in concert with other parts and other regions of the county. I think often this body too heavily focuses on the South Coast, and when we talk about equity and spreading funds and time throughout the county, it really would be a nice sign of good faith to be focusing on these other areas and not waiting till we have Santa Barbara all jiggered up before we work on other parts of the county. So that would be my comment on that. The other item was the kind of regional numbers that we're looking at. If we can go back to the slide of the allocation of the 10% off the top for, I wanted to see those projects. Let's go back to that right here. So I know this is part of our regional application, right?
Yes.
So help me with what is really regional. I see a lot of geographically specific locations here. I do see, so I'm trying to understand, besides the Clean Air Express, what project in here is actually regional?
So when we used, through the chair, Director Nelson, when we use the regional, we're seeing a countywide application. So it would include local and non-local projects in the application. So these are local needs up front for transit partners. We do have some regional, projects where other operators can use facilities as shared facilities. So that would be an example of the Santa Maria and the Santa Barbara. And then the other projects are projects that we are looking to complete
My concern is that we have this 10% set aside is put forward to attract more money for these projects, and I get that, but that somehow that we're not spending that equitably. You know, of that 10%, 5% of that would be coming from the North County, and 5% would be coming off the top from the South County. Is there a way to keep those funds bifurcated, even though we're making this regional application, so that that we don't necessarily spend each other's funds moving forward?
Yes. So just to clarify, is that within the 10%, or is that afterwards?
That's within the 10%.
So bifurcating the 10% between.
So what I'm hearing is having the application be balanced between north and south that we submit to the state for leveraging, using that 10% balanced for north versus south.
Absolutely.
I hear you.
Yeah,
so we haven't done that analysis yet, so we could do that, and we can bring that back to the board if that's the direction from the board.
Yeah, my concern is that often our expenditures weigh to a certain part of the county, and so if we're going to be giving up 5% of the North County allocation, we don't want necessarily that to lose out on that and only get 3% back. So let's make sure that that's part of the balancing act, and with that, I could support this.
Okay.
And it also could be partially funded too. So if we did that, we would know where that money would go back to if we were to return to the original formula.
Right, and that's the sensitivity that's up here on that, or at least from myself,
sure.
but I'm
No,
sure a
we
lot of
hear
the
you.
other directors as well.
So, okay, so just so I understand, so when we submit the application, assuming we get the funding, then when we come back, we'll see what got funded, and then we'll work to distribute the 10% that way.
But we'll also endeavor in the submittal to have a balanced package that has both North and South County projects that are
In the
somewhat
application.
equitable. It might not be to the dollar,
Yeah,
but
sure, no, I understand.
we'll
I'm
make
not-
it as equitable as we can.
And I understand the Clean Air Express is a regional project, so
Yeah.
that one, to me is off the top. That
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily benefit one section of the county or the other.
Got it.
Yes.
And that's why when I saw that list, I didn't really see true regional projects besides the Clean Air Express. And so I understand that's off the top and that benefits both communities.
Yes.
But as far as those other projects are concerned, it seemed like it makes sense that we are careful about how we distribute those funds.
Thank you.
Before I move to Director Infante, okay, who's the light on then? I've got somebody with a light on. Thank you, it was you, all right. The chart that is attachment A2
Yes.
does a better job, I think, of showing what you thought as regional projects than the chart that was up there. Because the chart that was up there just sort of mentioned projects. But when you look at attachment A2, funding needs for eligible regional projects, it does sort of break it down a little bit better in the packet. I don't know that it's part of your slides, but it's in
So
the packet.
it's not a part, but we do have the chart ready to put
Okay.
up on their screen.
Okay.
So thank you, Erin.
Yeah,
so
I think
thank you for
that
that.
helps a little bit.
Yes, I tried to not make
It's
the
hard to
slides
read.
too- yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to read. It's in attachment B if you have your documents in front of you, either electronically or printed. It's attachment B. It says attachment A2 on the page, but it's attachment B when you click on
Okay.
it's scrolled down and it's in one of them. You scroll up. So if you click on attachment B and scroll up, you'll see the spreadsheet and you can read it better. And it has a better breakdown and it shows that the grade crossings are along with Union Pacific Railroad, which is why they're seen as regional, because the transportation is regional. And then the rail and the regional transformative with the city of Santa Maria's regional charging, transit center, and integrated regional fare media and information system. Those are more the regional applications. Hey, look at you. You get that closer to being readable on the big screen. Congratulations. Appreciate that. So that's a better idea of what the document was saying rather than that other list, which doesn't feel like it actually shows it very well. if
Sure.
that
Oh,
helps.
good.
And then are there any questions from Santa Barbara?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Director Williams.
as I understand it, the idea is to take the 10% off the top to go out for grants, and if we're unsuccessful, to return those by the same ratio and split. Is that essentially what we're, or if we don't spend it, all the 10% in getting those grants.
For clarification, I will try and add an additional level to this question. What I'm hearing is the recommendation is go 45, 45, 10, and outside of that, an additional 10% pulled to hold for the 5 million. That the 5 million being held at 10% isn't part of the formula 10%.
So the idea by staff is that 5 million off the top to go to the grant, the competitive grant, and then after that it's 45 south, 45 north, 10% to regional. We submit the grant application using the 10% or 5 million. If we don't get the grant, we take that 5 million back and then redistribute using the 45, 45, 10. If we do get the grant, we look at 5 million and split between north, south, and regional to redistribute.
And I think that's an important distinction to make because we were talking about two different 10%.
Yes.
Does that help, Director Williams?
It does. I guess the only concern is when I see, eligible regional projects, I do see projects that are multimodal that could facilitate, multimodal systems, but I don't actually see a lot of transit projects. So if this is the list that we're going with, I would probably not support.
Okay, so just
But if
That was
it's just examples,
Yeah.
if it's just examples, and we actually go out and try to find more actual transit projects, then that idea seems like a good one.
Okay, so just to clarify, Chair, this was just an example. What you see on the screen, Director Williams, was just an example of potential prospective projects to include in the competitive grant. We're going to include additional projects within this grant when we submit to the state.
Got it. Okay.
So I have a question as well.
Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. So I'm clear because obviously a big priority for us is the Cabrillo Boulevard Rail. It's a multi-modal project that's going to tie in with all of our roundabout work, the 4 roundabouts between Los Patos and the 2 on CBR, as well as the 1 on San Ysidro. And so as we look at this, clearly our share would not be enough money to do any one particular bridge project, but would this then be eligible for future grant or future matching funds as we go forward to do that bridge?
Thank you. Through the chair, Director Rouse, thank you for the question. And actually, if we include the Cabrillo Boulevard project that's shown on the screen, the entire project is not eligible for the competitive program, but we would be submitting for the rail portion, which is about half the need. So if we were successful in securing the $20 million or so from this program, this is what I like to do. We could then leverage that for the Senate Bill 1 program that we're going to submit to the California Transportation Commission. The final suite of projects includes Cabrillo. So we would be using this competitive match as a match for the Senate Bill 1 program. So to answer your question, yes.
All right. Director Nelson?
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. Is there any reason that if we need additional matches out of the 45% that couldn't come back to the board? I know we're offering up that initial 10%, but if there's if we get approved on projects that are more heavily weighted to one region, right, and there's additional funds that are needed, is there any reason why that couldn't come back to the board and we can mine some of that 45% for those projects? Because that makes sense to me, that as we move forward, if one region is more successful than the other on getting their grant applications, that instead of pulling out of that center funds, that it just come out of the that region's general funds.
Yes, I would say that would go back to the north or the south, depending on where that is, for them to negotiate and work that out. That's the process that we've determined so far, is that the 45, actually in the north, the transit agencies in the north would need to collaborate and work on that and make a recommendation to the board on what they want to do with the 45%. So in a roundabout way, yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then getting back to, if we can, I know it stinks, but if you can get back to that PDF with the chart. And so if we go down to the capital, and I just kind of want to point out what my concern is that when we look at the capital projects, I only see one really North County project there, and some of these capital projects are often the most expensive, right? We have the Highway 166 project. I guess we do have the Santa Maria Regional project there, but as far as the load of capital, it's definitely weighted to one area versus the other, and so I want to make sure that there's equity as we move forward on that.
And through the chair, so Director Nelson, we were looking at all projects countywide that had any crossing with Union Pacific, and so due to the route, that's why you're seeing. And so we would love to include more projects, but it was just there's some constraints with what projects we could present. And I think, sorry.
Actually, before he steps in, because I think he might be able to answer this question as well, there are still a lot of railroad crossing projects in the city of Lompoc and in the city of Santa Maria that are not Union Pacific, but other railroad, smaller railroads. Are we thinking about that as part of this process at all?
Aaron, you want to answer that one?
Through the chair, Supervisor Nelson, what I was going to add was that the low sand corridor safety projects that are listed there, which are focused on the Union Pacific subdivision, include projects within the city of Lompoc at the surf station, south of that, in between, closer to Vandenberg, or on the other side closer to Vandenberg. But no, nothing specific within city property or branch lines.
I just think that should be a part of focus of our trail, or sorry, our rail focus is making sure that we're finding these same opportunities within our cities. I mean, calling Surf Beach part of the city of Lompoc, even though that's in proximity, it's like calling Guadalupe city of Santa Maria. I mean, there's quite a bit of distance there. So that's why it's not a legitimate transit option for us, because we have to drive, potentially 10 or 15 minutes from the urban populations to eventually a station. So it's not really practical. It's not even the last mile, it's the last 15 miles. I just want to keep that in mind, that there are still a lot of needs, a lot of smaller railroad crossings that are in our communities that might impact some of these things like multimodal transportation, and having those railroad crossings improved would be a huge benefit to both jurisdictions in Lompoc and Santa Maria.
So through the chair, we're going to come back to your board in December to get authorization to submit the application. So our commitment to your board between now and then is to do additional research on if there's any additional projects that we could add that address your comments.
Thank you, Sarkis.
All right, before we go to a recommendation, are there any public comments on this item, either online or here?
Chair Osborne, I see no request for public comment here in the office or in the online.
All right, Santa Barbara, do you have any requests for public comment on this item?
We have no request for public comment.
Thank you very much. All right, I will bring it back to the board for discussion or recommendation. Director Nelson has one. We'll start with you.
Well, I was just going to go with staff's recommendation, but taking into context the comments that have been made here and the commitments by staff to come back with some of this additional information, I would formalize the comments from staff into the motion.
All right, and I was going to do the same, so I'll give you a second. Roll call vote, please.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Lavanino?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian? Absent. King?
Aye.
Hernandez?
Aye.
Richards?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
Thank you. All right, item 4B.
5B.
Oh, 5B,
That's okay.
sorry. Yeah.
Regional Broadband Joint Power Authority Amendment. Provide directions to staff on pursuing an amendment to the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments Regional Joint Powers Agreement.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this was an item on your last meeting's agenda about the broadband and the status of what we've done so far, all the activities we've been working with the Broadband Consortium as well as the RCRC, Rural County Representative something of California, of implementing the broadband, and that is going very, very well. We submitted a grant just this past month to fund the top priorities that are included in the broadband strategic plan to implement broadband access and last mile access using the contracts that you approved in the last couple of months. But this item is to focus on the Joint Powers Authority. This was included as part of the grant that we got from the local agency's local agency technical assistance program through the California Public Utilities Commission. Part of that grant was to do 3 things, and which 2 of them we discussed last month was the high-level design network for the last mile, the programmatic EIR, which we have a request for proposals going out to complete that work. And the last one, which I want to discuss today, is forming the Joint Powers Authority in Santa Barbara County. So included in your staff report are several options for amending or pursuing a Joint Powers Authority for Santa Barbara County. The first is very simplistic. It's amending our existing Joint Powers Authority to add a paragraph to designate SBCAG as the responsible entity to plan, coordinate, and facilitate the regional broadband internet access service or related telecommunication services. And moving those things forward, but not including any permitting activities. We do not want to get into that business at your local jurisdiction, so that it's specifically excluding that responsibility, but basically to plan, coordinate, apply for funding, and implement broadband and work with our jurisdictions to make those things happen. So in working with our legal counsel, we thought that this was the most straightforward approach to accomplishing the task before us. But before we did that, we wanted to get your direction to make sure that this is how you wanted to proceed with this action. Included in the staff report are other options, some a little more complicated than what the first option that I just presented. The second option would be to create a whole new Joint Powers Authority. It could have different membership, different rules, and different voting, and all those fun things. If you all want to go down that road, we can, but I wanted to get direction if you did not want to do that. Option 3 would be also to create a whole a brand new entity for Santa Barbara County without SBCAG's involvement. This could be a separate entity like you have with the Beacon, the beach replenishment. That's a total separate Joint Powers Authority, or LAFCO is a total separate entity. So those are similar organizations that an SBCAG would not be involved. You can continue with that. Or you can continue like we have to date. We've been serving in this role under our authority under transportation planning, and we've been working that under that authority to date, but we felt it was somewhat makes it a little more legitimate if we physically had your direction included in our Joint Powers Authority to continue in this role, because there may be some limitations to what we're currently doing, and we may get some pushback on funding and whatnot, like we did with under the LATA grant, where we had to change the law. So with this, I presented 4 options to you. Staff is recommending the first option because it's the most simplistic. We have not presented this to any of your legal counsels from the jurisdictions, the member jurisdictions. They might have a different idea that we might have to come back to the board with to get some direction, but this is just our initial shot. We think it's the most straightforward and the cleanest way to go, and we would like your direction to continue down this path. And I will stop talking because I think I said it all.
So my first question is, given you're making the recommendation, do you feel with the current staff that you could continue to do the work that you're doing?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions here? Director Infante.
Just a comment. I would agree with your option number 1. For simplicity's sake and a lot of other reasons. The other thing that bothers me is if you want to amend or create a new JPA, you have to establish the liabilities of all the partners as well as the funding and everything else. It's a problem, it's a lot of work, and I think it's unnecessary, so I would support your option 1.
Yes, thank you.
Any questions from Santa Barbara for staff?
This is Director Hartman. I would just make a brief statement that I was really eager to see the initial work done with SBCAG. It seemed that broadband is another kind of infrastructure, so it fitted well within the framework of SBCAG. And I think we want to be as efficient and effective as we can possibly be. And so I think having the clarity about our governance is important. But using the existing infrastructure rather than to create something anew seems to me highly desirable. And I think over the process of developing the strategic plan and the ad hoc committee's work and now actually implementing some grants, we've developed some internal expertise. So we've, so that's another argument in favor of this being more efficient and effective. So I am also in support of option number 1.
Well, and I think ultimately, so many of our broadband connections are also placed along transportation lines, either telecommunication or rail or roadways. So it is at the state level. I participate in the Transportation, Communication, and Public Works Committee for cities, and broadband is looped into that. So I think it's the appropriate place because you advocate for similar access and can utilize similar locations to expand. So that's one of the reasons I think this is the right home for it. Director Nelson?
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. And I just wanted to acknowledge Chair Osborne and Director Hartman's leadership on this. They both have been early adopters in pushing this forward. I think the reason why our county has been so successful is from both of their leadership. And the other caveat is not just the infrastructure along corridors, but we know, especially post-COVID, that a lot more people are working from home, and having accessible, reliable broadband keeps cars off the road, which furthers some of the goals of SBCAG in our regional transit needs. So that's a really important piece to remember. I was going to say that I think Reagan's attributed with the quote that the closest thing to an eternity on Earth is a government program. I would actually one up him here and actually say the closest thing to eternity on Earth is a government agency. So I'm not looking forward to creating another government agency.
Right.
So I'm in favor of the proposal that we have that staff has recommended with option 1. I do think maybe in the future option 3 is something we can look at if the need arises. But I think we should all be very careful about that. If we're going to be living with an eternity, we got to make sure it's the right product. And I think it's too soon to tell.
Okay. Director King?
No, ma'am. I was just waiting for a motion.
Oh, all right. There you go. You're being proactive. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Chair Osborne, I see no requests for public comment.
Are there any requests in Santa Barbara?
There are no requests in Santa Barbara.
All right. So we will now entertain a motion. Would you like to do the honors?
Yes,
King?
I will move that we go with option 1 as presented by staff.
Second.
And Director Hernandez did the second on that one. Roll call vote, please.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Levanino?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Hernandez? Aye. Richards?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne?
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
Thank you. Item 5C.
Item 5C, unmet transit needs process direction. 5C1, direct staff to carry out the fiscal year 2023-24 unmet transit needs process, assuming no associated Transportation Development Act funding will be allocated pursuant to Article 8 of the Transportation Development Act. Or 5C2, direct staff to carry out the fiscal year 2023-24 unmet transit needs process with the assumption that a portion of associated Transportation Development Act funding may be allocated pursuant to Article 8 of the Transportation Development Act.
Mr. Becker.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Directors. Mike Becker, staff. This item was continued from the last meeting, so we're here, and I'm going to offer a much abbreviated presentation compared to what I did last month, and then we have Chris Nedden from County Public Works here to answer some of the questions that were directed towards the county. Next slide, please. So just what Terry had just read, we're asking for your direction. We've been doing this for, I believe, 4 years now. And this is prior to us getting into the unmet transit needs process of whether or not the board, as a one-year policy, would consider allowing the Transportation Development Act local transportation funds to go for non-transit purposes. And it's through the unmet transit needs process that we make the finding. So essentially, if there are no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet per board adopted definition and criteria, then the TDA local transportation funds can be used for non-transit purposes. So based on prior board direction a couple years ago, we've been asking this question every year. It enables us to scope our work appropriately, as well as to ensure that we're not misinforming the public as we go through a public process. But essentially what we're asking for, there's two options. One, to direct us to carry it out, just assuming that no Transportation Development Act local transportation funds will be allowed to go to non-transit purposes, or that it may be a possibility. And even if it is a possibility, we still go through the process to determine if there are unmet transit needs and if they're reasonable to meet or not before any funds could go for non-transit purposes. So those are the two options. It's a either or that we're asking today. Next slide. So this is the primary difference between the two processes. For both, we carry out a public outreach process to receive comment related to potential unmet transit needs in the region. With the option one, and that's where we assume that the board will not permit these funds to go for non-transit purposes. We just collate the public comments into a memorandum, we present it to the board, and we provide it to our transit providers, and that's the end of the process. If it is an option that these funds could go for non-transit purposes, we're required to analyze them to determine, number one, if they meet the definition of an unmet transit need, and number two, if they satisfy the criteria for being reasonable to meet. If unmet transit need, if something is found to be an unmet transit need that is reasonable to meet, that must be satisfied before the funds could go for non-transit purposes. And that's we would bring a resolution back in the spring, and we're also required to conduct a demographic analysis as part of that, and that's all just satisfying the Transportation Development Act. Next slide, please. So the Transportation Development Act contains two pots of funding. One is the State Transit Assistance Program. That's not what we're talking about today. That's allocated, you can see the formula there, by population and fare revenue, and that goes straight to the transit providers. The one that we're talking about today is the Local Transportation Fund, and more particularly in the North County, which is equivalent to about $12.5 million a year. And it's allocated by population to the jurisdictions in the region. And for the last couple of years, it's all been allocated for transit purposes by following the board direction. And this year, we're asking the same question again. But so it's the LTF portion of the Transportation Development Act funding that is in question today. Next slide. So this is the fiscal year 23-24 allocations. So the process we're going through is looking at the 24-25 allocations, but just to give a picture. And I think what I wanted to highlight is the county was allocated nearly $3 million. However, every single claimant on that list has some part, if not all of that funding, comes from the county's portion. So the county's portion, that $452,841, or yes, it looks like it's off a little. It's a computer. You have to turn your head a little bit to be able to see it. So that's ultimately kind of what we're talking about, is that portion of the county's funding that the county does not already allocate to another provider. And with that, I wanted to introduce Chris Snedden and let him talk about and let you probe him with questions about what's the county. I think there was two questions from last month, one being what are the reserves that the county currently has, and number two, what are some of the proposed uses that the county may seek to use the funds for, if not for transit? Chris?
Good morning, Chair Osborne and Directors. Chris Nedden, County Public Works. So just to touch on those two things that Mike brought up, the reserves and potential uses, we currently have about $1.3 million in reserves that was claimed for TDA for transit operations and capital. The bulk of that was intended to be for potential bus replacements for Kiama Transit that we have been operating through third-party providers or transit agencies. We're currently working with SMART on an agreement whereby they would operate Kiama Transit for us, and that would include using their fleet to do that. So that could open up the potential for other uses of the reserves. We're working with them on that. And we've been working with our other North County partners on potential improvements like studies for EV charging infrastructure, just looking at the county unincorporated population service and how to improve services, transit services for unincorporated county residents. And then upgrading bus stops throughout the North County. And it was kind of through this, beginning this program to upgrade bus stops and doing an assessment of the inventory and some of the improvements that we could be doing, where we realized that it's fairly restrictive if you do the bus stop improvements under the transit operations and capital to specifically just the bus stops. Excuse me. And that if we could broaden the uses a little bit, we could really work on connecting last mile connectivity to those bus stops. So the infrastructure that supports the bus stops and improves people's access to their services. So that would be one of the potential uses if there was other options available. And we would work through our county board to come up with what they feel the policy for using these funds would be. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for either Mr. Becker or Mr. Snedden? Anyone in Santa Barbara?
This is Director Hartman, and this is a question for Mr. Snedden. Are there some projects that you could anticipate that could you describe in more detail the kinds of projects that could support last mile, like completing sidewalks or bike parking or other things? And then could you also talk about maybe pilot projects where needs might have been unreasonable, but you've nonetheless been able to fund them?
Chair Osborne, Director Hartman, thank you for that question. I think you answered it though for me. Those are very good examples of the types of things we would be looking at. So again, when we started looking at the bus stops and the potential bus stop improvements that fall under this category, we could do a lot of really great improvements to improve the experience of people waiting for the bus. But we started realizing that would be creating an island that was unconnected to other infrastructure to get to the bus. And so, which under our understanding, there's kind of a really limited area that you can work around and near these things under the current qualifications. So we started looking at how to not just improve that, but improve all the connectivity, which may be connecting up to the nearest pedestrian infrastructure, or bike parking is another example that you mentioned that would be potential uses. I'm sorry, I forgot this. There was a second part of your question.
Pilot needs that
yes.
are.
Thank you. And the county has done this in the past, and this is one of the things that comes out of the full unmet needs study is it may be that there's unmet needs that are determined to be unreasonable to meet under the kind of strict guidelines that determine that process. That doesn't mean that we can't still elect to try and provide some or all of that service for a pilot period and see how it works out. And we have done that in the past at the county with this funding. And with the flexible funding, you're allowed to do that because it doesn't have to meet the same requirements for reasonable to meet.
All right. Any more questions?
Sure. I typically have opposed this, but I guess I would be, interested in examining what could be pilot projects that would facilitate new transit or connectivity that could facilitate riders in the North County for new transit or for existing transit in that case. If I also was seeing that we would, take the monies available and put it into the, we have an identified potential for an additional time per day for the Clean Air Express. We just had that progress report 6 months ago. Before the pandemic, we were ready to add another line. Ridership is going back up. I guess I could see that if we were going to use some of the funds, right now to make what is to me the most obvious need, which is another time of day for Clean Air Express.
Director Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. And I know that Director Williams has been really hot on that extra route, and I understand that might be an option or something that's needed. Sounds like Director Hartman's suggestion that maybe that be one of the pilot projects that could be considered. I think it should probably come back to the board, and I also, for my my support, I would look for a match from South Coast Transit operators to do that, because it is a regional benefit. I think what we're looking for here is some flexibility so that we can do some things here. For those who are concerned about these funds being taken and just put as more, asphalt to further move away from transit, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for these funds to be more flexible so that we can use them for other multimodal options, whether that's helping with our ATP or active transportation plans, or potentially, connectivities. I mean, San Ynez Valley, Orchid, Los Alamos all have plans in place without funding mechanisms. And so it makes sense that if we have that flexibility, we can further some of these transit type goals. I mean, the whole concept behind transit is to get people out of cars and finding alternatives to driving by themselves. Mm-hmm. If we have some of these pathways through some of our unincorporated areas, we're going to be able to see more opportunities for people to use other alternative transportation modes besides driving themselves, right? We're going to be able to see a lot more people use, the San Ynez Trail or the Orchid River or Orchid Community Trail to maybe travel to work. And so that gets people out of their cars, satisfying the same goals of transit, but just in another way. And so I know as there's heartburn out there, I know from Director Williams, he has my commitment that that we'd spend these funds, or at least I would be voting on spending these funds towards something that would fit that narrative, not necessarily just bring it back in for additional pavement. So I hope that this board moves forward with, giving us that flexibility as a county. It's, I think it's another tool that we have in our tool belt. I know it's additional work for SBCAG staff to do that, and I appreciate that, but I do think it would have a lot of benefits moving forward.
All right, if there are no other questions, I'll ask if there's any public comment.
Chair Osborne, we have one request online, Mr. Mark Chatello.
Okay.
Go ahead and start. Mr. Chatello?
Good morning, members of the board. This is Mark Chatello, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Committees for Land, Air, Waters, and Species. This is obviously an issue and programs that are very important to the overall community. I do want to remind the board that the purposes of the Transportation Development Act and the Unmet Transit Needs Process are fundamentally a civil rights program to address the needs of the elderly, handicapped youth, and citizens of limited means, and to benefit the total transportation system of the state. With those purposes in mind, I am finding the discussion that your board and Mr. Sneddon just described interesting, and of course, it does make sense. We want to make the most efficient and effective use of these funds. So it is somewhat attractive, but I do think I would prefer clause has always preferred option 1. The public outreach and comment process and summary memorandum then results in action. It's not, as it was described in the staff graphic, there's an additional step when these funds are directed just to transit and that they do address the needs. As Mr. Sneddon described some of the projects where these funds would potentially be used, it would appear and seemed that many of them would actually qualify as transit projects. The last mile and connectivity is something that does benefit the total transportation system in accordance with the Transportation Development Act. Of the list, the only one that didn't seem to be specific to that was EV charging infrastructure, assuming that that's single occupancy vehicle or personal vehicle EV charging infrastructure. EV charging infrastructure for transit systems would actually certainly qualify under the Transportation Development Act. So I have to say, based on what I've heard, I'm not convinced that the projects that are described would not qualify for funding under the TDA. Would appreciate hearing from staff if that's not correct. So in closing, we do support the concept of making the best use, the most efficient use, and I appreciate Supervisor Nelson's commitment that no, this is not going to be used for additional asphalt. That's the concern, that transit funds get diverted to be used for road purposes. So as long as that's an express understanding and we're seeking to provide the maximum benefit to the communities that are supposed to be served by the Transportation Development Act and our civil rights commitments throughout the state, it's an interesting discussion, and it's something if the board does choose to pursue it, it should be done in a transparent and extremely overt manner, including the interested constituencies. But I do believe, based on my read of the law and hearing these projects, that they would likely pretty much all qualify under the TDA if you did choose option 1.
Thank you, Mr. DiCello. Your time is up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Do we have any public comment in Santa Barbara?
We do not have any public comment here in Santa Barbara.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the board for any questions or motion. Director Nelson.
Director Hartman?
Yes, Director Hartman?
Could we have Mr. Sneddon comment? Because he works with these programs, and if he says that he's uncertain about the flexibility that he enjoys, I'd like to understand more about that.
Director Hartman, through the chair, we've attempted to do sort of expanded projects for transit stops in the past and been told that there was risk in audits to expanding beyond simply doing bus stop improvements, and SBCAG, I believe, gets audited as well. So it's kind of a gray area, but it's at risk depending on exactly what you're doing.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm open to a compromise on this, but if the compromise is also involves taking away formula funds from South County Transit, I can't support that. That would be a perverse result if by being able to use transit funds for non-transit uses that facilitate transit, we actually have to reduce services provided. That would be a sort of like the counter of the intent of the TDA law. And I wouldn't support taking away formula funds from North County Transit, nor would I to do South County Transit. What I'm saying is I could support a compromise that involves using this for pilot projects, or for pilot projects in transit, I think are a no-brainer. But sidewalk projects that facilitate ridership in transit and also help a lot of people get around in non-transit uses, if we're also putting some money towards the Clean Air Express. But if the price of putting money towards the Clean Air Express is to reduce transit uses from existing transit, then that's not a compromise, and I would go with option one.
This is Director Hartman, Chair Osborne. I believe the decision before us is what kind of process, what kind of analysis SBCAG does. And would this come back to us again then, once we know the unmet needs that are unreasonable to pursue?
Director Hartman, this is Mike Becker. Yes, the findings, if assuming option B, or option 2, the finding will come back for the board to adopt a resolution with the finding of unmet transit needs reasonable to meet. The county, as it submits its TDA claim, will engage the Board of Supervisors on what projects are in that. The TDA claims come to SBCAG, and that's typically approved during the month of June. So there'll be a couple more touch points before any money would get spent.
So if I might say, I think we're all in agreement that transit needs are first. We don't want to interfere with the formula, but we do want greater flexibility. So I think option 2, even though it does require more work from SBCAG, moves us along that direction. And we get to think about it some more once we have that analysis. So I would move option 2.
I'll second.
Lavanino.
Director Nelson.
Yes. I think the debate that Supervisor Williams and I will have about the Clean Air Express is probably for another hearing, and I'm open. I'll just tell him right now over remote testimony that I'm open to the conversation. I want to understand it better. And it's always my concern is subsidizing things regionally from one other regions as a general principle. So I could be convinced that it makes sense to fund it completely from this excess funds from the North County. Ultimately, I'll need more information. And I think ultimately that will be a decision of the Board of Supervisors, and him and I will get to do that from the dais in the future if these funds are made available. So I'm not hard and fast on that. That's just kind of my knee-jerk reaction when I hear that. But I think we'll get a chance to have that conversation at a later date. So I'm also supportive of option 2. I think gives us the most flexibility that we can have ongoing conversations. I am sensitive that this is extra work for SBCAG staff, and I appreciate the work that you guys do into that effort. I do think it will have some greater benefits for the region moving from there. Even if we decide that there's unmet needs, we could, as a county, can still determine if it's all money right back into transit. So that's still an option on the table, and I want to have that flexibility. So we'll support the motion.
All right, we have a motion for option 2. Roll call vote, please. Yes,
Chair.
Director Williams?
I just wanted to quickly, I appreciate that, Mr. Ellison, and I'll offer to Brown Act with you, and maybe we can figure it out, I just want you to know that this all comes from a real place that I sincerely want the best transit service for North County residents possible, and hope that we can work on that together. I'll be a no vote. I'm going to pull a Bob Nelson. I'm going to be a no vote today, but we'll hope to get to a yes vote.
I love it.
All right, roll call vote, please.
Director Williams. Capps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Lavanino.
Aye.
Infante.
Aye.
King.
Aye.
Hernandez. Aye. Richards.
Aye.
Clark.
No.
Rouse.
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 10-0. 10-2, sorry.
10-2, yeah, thanks. I was counting.
10-11.
I know.
I had the 2 1s there.
All right, item 5D.
Okay, item 5D, draft 2024 Regional Transportation Improvement Program recommendations. Review and comment on the 2024 draft Regional Transportation Improvement Program programming proposal for submittal to the California Transportation Commission.
Thank you.
Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair Osborne. We do have a slide deck that was also included in the staff report. Next slide, please. So today we're presenting the draft of how SBCAG staff recommends to use our share of state gas tax money So our region gets a regional share from the state. Next slide, please. We gave you we gave your board a sneak peek in July after we received the Senate Bill 1 Cycle 3 award for the US 101 multimodal corridor. So today's a draft. What happens is the California Department of Transportation every 2 years looks at all available revenues from federal and state sources and then has a formula that distributes that money. 25% goes to Caltrans for the interregional program, and then 75% goes to regions like ours based on population. And so every 2 years we have to submit our proposal to the California Transportation Commission. There is good news with this cycle of the State Transportation Improvement Program. There is an increase in funding, one part coming from federal funding through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. The second part was increased in revenues from the state gas tax. So that's collected, and so there's an increase in funding than prior cycles for this STIP cycle. Next slide, please. In terms of the schedule, we received the fund estimate back. It was approved in August by the California Transportation Commission, so we knew our amount. And so what we're doing now is presenting the draft proposal to your board. It did go to TTAC a couple weeks ago. And then once we get direction today, it'll go back to TTAC for recommended approval by your board in November. And then we submit the proposal to the California Transportation Commission in December. And then they take all the submittals statewide, and then they approve the State Transportation Improvement Program in March of next year. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the good news. Our share of the funding this cycle is about $20 million. And so what we're proposing is that we can use 5% for what's called planning, programming, and monitoring. That helps us work on project delivery, but we also use that funding to help with support for our local agencies with our quarterly meetings, just to make sure that they're informed of available funding and that we can help them pursue that funding. Per the Measure A strategic plan and board policy, we're recommending that the balance be programmed to the Santa Barbara US 101 multimodal corridor to help complete the corridor. You need to have a fully funded component in the State Transportation Improvement Program. So the proposal for what you see on the board is the last HOV segment that remains to be funded. And then the Cabrillo project, which we talked about under Senate Bill 125. So those are two of the projects in the remaining package that we're going to submit to the CTC to fully fund and complete the corridor in Santa Barbara. 14.3 million is going to go towards construction support, and then we're going to seek construction capital funding from the CTC through SB1. For the Cabrillo project, the $4.1 million is going to go towards right-of-way capital, along with a match from Measure A and Regional Surface Transportation Program. So that's going to fund right-of-way, and then we're going to pursue construction money from the CTC through Senate Bill 1 Cycle 4. So this is helping complete pre-construction segments or construction capital for E-North. And then it's helping us reduce our ask to the CTC for the last application to complete the corridor. Next slide, please. Okay, good.
To make us more competitive.
Yes, so that we reduce the ask, I'm trying to be to be more strict, yes. It's going to reduce our ask, make us more competitive, and then we can move on. Okay. Thanks. Thank you. That concludes staff's recommendation.
Questions, Director Nelson?
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. Why don't I see any North County projects on our regional transportation improvement plan?
Chair Nelson, through the chair, current board policy is that regional transportation improvement program funding be used to fully fund and complete the Santa Barbara US 101 multimodal corridor. So that is a board policy.
So as a board, we don't apply for any other region, nothing in the the central part of our county or in the North County at this point until the 101 widening is fully funded?
Correct, fully funded and completed. So it is staff's goal to get that final piece of funding from the CTC. And then once that is completed, then, so a couple things are gonna be happening. One thing is we're gonna be updating the Measure A strategic plan this year. And so we're looking to do a board workshop and then explain that process. We're doing that because we got the SB1 Cycle 3 award, and so that's changing the delivery schedule. And then, fingers crossed, and assuming we're still optimistic, we're going to get the final funding piece from the CTC in June of 2025. Then we're going to do another Measure A strategic plan update. That's going to assume 101 is fully funded. And then we're going to be looking at the remaining projects. SBCAG has entered into a Measure A cooperative agreement with the City of Santa Maria to make Measure A funding available for them to do pre-construction for the Highway 101-135 project. So what we're doing right now in this timeline of Measure A is we're almost done with the Highway 101 corridor. We're now working with the local partners on remaining projects, including Santa Maria, to get them ready to secure or to seek funding from the SB1 programs and from federal programs.
And I knew the answer to that question. I was asking it just for the benefit of all the directors to get some of the history here and how we got to where we're at. I wasn't here when the Measure A was passed. I don't think any of us were, for that matter, and maybe not even the staff. But what I was always, Sarkis was? And Terry, okay.
And Terry.
But I have to rely on my staff and my public works director in giving me a little bit of history. I've been here actually 11 years, and it predates me and even Steve, I think. But the conversation when we passed that tax was $140 million off the top of Measure A would go towards the 101 widening, because to pass this, it was really a regional approach. You needed to get support and buy-in from the entire county to be able to tax ourselves to do these types of projects. What my public works director tells me often was that the RTIP funds were never part of that deal. And so that's been a big challenge for the rest of the county, is that later on, after we made that deal, the deal changed. And for well over a decade, the regional funds have, on top of the $140 million, has gone down to the South Coast for the 101 widening. And that's something that I just want to keep in everybody's mind, is that as we move forward, that it was a decade plus. I know everybody likes to point out that we spent some money on the early on in Measure A to do the Santa Maria River Bridge, and that was a significant funds, as well as the Nevada Parkway interchange. But when we look at it, to this point in Measure A, it's not even close when you put our TIP and Measure A dollars into the 101 widening. And I just want to have that on everybody's radar. I'm committed to finishing. I'm not trying to obstruct finishing the 101, but there's got to be a conversation that we have as a board post 101 on really making those similar investments up in the North County, because I think everybody was committed to the 101 widening, but as we know, that project grew to include all these other additional projects that were great quality of life projects, supporting things like multimodal and bike paths and a bunch of I would say ancillary projects, and so the price tag went up significantly than what was previously planned. So I want to make sure we get this done, but I also want to make sure that we're all prepared to make this similar investment in the other portions of our county.
Any questions, comments from South County directors?
I'm not seeing any from South County.
All right. Director Lavanino.
I do have a question. Sarkis, you mentioned that we would be reevaluating once the 101 was completed. And there's going to be a big time difference between when we get fully funded and when the project's actually completed.
Yes.
So I'd like it to come back, and I know you said you're going to come back with a Measure A update in between those times. If I think it would be up for board discussion when we find out it is fully funded, how to move on from there as opposed to waiting for the entire construction. And I understand why you're doing that is because something else could come up and we've got to look at something. But I think at that point, it would be more of us looking at trying to divert other funds that we maybe have programmed somewhere else at that point. But I guess that's up for future discussion at some point. But just personally, you know, I don't share as much angst, but I'm probably 80% of the way there as well. But waiting when something's fully funded and then waiting for it to actually be constructed while other cycles are going through would be hard for me to swallow. So I just think it's something we've got to take a look at in the future.
And through the chair, so that's why we update the Measure A strategic plan, Director Lavigno. So we're going to do the update starting at the end of this year. And then we're committed to doing another update once we know the results of the final SB1 application, which we'll know in June of 2025. So we will start the strategic plan update again in summer of 2025.
All right. Any public comment on this?
Chair Osborne, we have one request for public comment, Mr. Mark Chatello.
All right.
Go ahead, Mr. Chatello.
Good morning again, members of the board. Mark Chatello on behalf of Committees for Land, Air, Water, and Species. And I just wanted to remind the board, as somebody who was in the room when Measure A was discussed after the failure of the prior measure, reauthorization of Measure D, that the 101 corridor was required as part of that plan, and the campaign materials that were characterized and really the agreement that led to the overall funding package with the allocations for alternative transportation, with specific allocations north versus south and in some of the cities. It was a very carefully titrated agreement that resulted in an acceptable measure that passed and has made a significant imprint on the entire county since then. The critical piece for the 101 corridor was the lane and the train. And I know we've seen there's some good news and some developments there, but it's really important that the board also hold that priority and support staff and work with the agencies that are necessary, external agencies, in order to accomplish that objective. It's a complicated one, it's difficult, none of this is easy, but we want to make sure that in fulfilling and trying to accomplish the intent and spirit of Measure A, that we also have a commuter rail service between Ventura and Santa Barbara, and there were some proponents of a rail service north as well. And I think that would be something that could also be extremely beneficial to the entire county and really move us forward in an important way. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was remained committed to that goal, and we can continue to see a successful resolution and completion of the Measure A program. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in Santa Barbara?
We have no request for public comment in Santa Barbara.
All right, Director Lavigno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know we don't normally respond to public comment, but I just wanted to say that as far as I'm concerned, 100% committed, Mr. Chatello, to providing what we promised the voters, which is that commuter rail, and anything we can do in the North County to help make that a reality, we're more than happy to do. Because I think we all understand that Measure A runs out in 2040, which seems like a long ways away. We're already halfway through Measure A. So we're going to have to go back to the voters at some point. And I think Measure A has been a tremendous success. It sets us up. I mean, there's no way without Measure A we get the 101 widened and all the ancillary projects and all the other things that we've done. So spelling out to the public exactly what we're going to do with their tax dollars and then coming through on that is what's going to allow us to have Measure A+ or whatever the next one is. So just wanted to reiterate my 100% support for the commuter rail.
You're absolutely right. Commuter rail would be utilized out of Lompoc on a regular basis if it was more reliable. Having utilized it, it unfortunately, on the return, isn't something you can consistently use, and as a result, doesn't get utilized. So there are great improvements that need to be made and options out there that would increase the use and reduce some of the clean air bus demand by having a more flexible route by rail as well. All right.
Madam Chair.
Director King.
And I just want to dovetail on what Steve said, is that we have a CRCC meeting tomorrow, and LoSAN and CRCC is diligently working on getting commuter trains that are usable, that are inexpensive, trying to lower the prices, because right now as it stands they're pretty expensive. But just to let the public know that we are working on that, and we do have a meeting tomorrow in Santa Barbara.
All right, thanks. All right, if there are no further comments or questions, I'll entertain a motion.
I don't think we need a motion.
You know, it's just accept. Oh, look at that. It's just as review and provide comment, which we've done excessively. All right. Then we will excessively, extensively, definitions. I know words mean things. We'll move on then to item 6, 1-minute reports. Is there anyone in Santa Barbara that has a 1-minute report?
I just that LoSAN met on Monday, one of our shorter meetings, and approved the fiscal assumptions behind our development of the next year's budget. It includes, what the state legislature has asked us to do, which is to identify possible efficiencies, because it seems that the state leaders are heralding that this year will be another lean year.
No one else in Santa Barbara. We'll bring it back to Santa Maria. Does anyone have a 1-minute report here? All right, seeing no 1-minute report.
Madam Chair.
Director King.
Kind of traffic related. November 4th, there is a Salute to Veterans Parade that will end up at the Maverick Saloon. And then for Valleywide, hope to see all of you at the Fall Fest on November 10th at 12.
All right. We'll close 1-minute reports and bring it to the Executive Director for her report.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairperson, members of the board. I just want to thank the community of Santa Maria for their Open Streets event. It was full of energy and people and fun all up and down the road. I think it was such a well-attended event, obviously a welcomed enjoyment for the community. We also joined MTD in their celebration and ribbon cutting for their arrival of their MTD bus, a 40-foot all-electric bus, and the installation of 14 new heavy-duty electric chargers. And that happened on Monday, October 16th, and several of our board members were in attendance as well, so thank you for supporting that. We also attended the 11th Annual Central Coast Sustainability Summit, and Sarkis Kachek was participated in a panel on transition to zero-emission vehicles in Santa Barbara County, along with city reps, City of Santa Barbara reps, County of Santa Barbara, and the Community Environmental Council. He provided some leadership on what we've done with our 6-county Central Coast zero-emission vehicle strategy and applying for additional funds to implement that. And we're still awaiting announcement of the award. We were hoping it would happen in the last week, but I think the federal government's been a little busy on other things. I do want to remind the board that we are hiring 2 new seeking applications for 2 positions, administrative assistant and program coordinator. The second is with our traffic solutions department, so those are very attractive positions. And last but not least, we had our annual Foot Frenzy race this past week. On Tuesday, it was, again, a fun time had by all. It's basically a scavenger hunt in a community. We chose the Funk race, and I want to let the board know that the team called What the Funk won. Yeah, it was also my team. So anyway, okay. And with that, I'll pass it back over to the chair.
Thank you so very much. And now, Mr. Eads for Caltrans report.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Pleasure to be with you here today. It's been a while. Been a season of travel for me. Okay, so a few things I wanted to report. First is Clean California Local Grant Program Cycle 2 awards were announced last week. One project was awarded to the City of Guadalupe for the transit hub renovation process. It'll upgrade the city's Amtrak station to a multimodal transit hub. It includes a public restroom, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, bike amenities, pervious pavers, improved signage, and site beautification. And the grant award was for $816 million. So really exciting news there. And the next thing I wanted to highlight, just a few more District 5 specific things. One is we are preparing for the winter storm season. We are hearing reports that it may be an active winter storm season again. So yesterday, key Caltrans staff met at our Santa Barbara maintenance yard to plan for winter storm events. It's an annual exercise we go through, looking over our protocols, just making sure we're well prepared, our equipment is operating well, and that we're considering lessons learned from last year. So that involves across functions, not just maintenance, construction, geotech, equipment managers, and others. So we're gearing up. Next is roadside vegetation trimming and litter removal efforts are continuing. You've probably seen, in fact, just on my way here this morning, here in Santa Maria, I saw trimming efforts continuing. So there's a couple benefits there in terms of the trimming efforts. One is it's raising the canopy of the trees to reduce the propensity for encampments on the state highway right away. It also is visually nice looking because it's trimming up the vegetation, and it also is providing fire protection benefits. So we're going to continue that work. It's and it has multiple facets there, and it's a longer term project, but you'll continue to see that take place in the coming months and years, hopefully. And then on the litter removal side, those efforts continue. Just a statewide statistic, since launching Clean California in July 2021, Caltrans and local partners have removed an estimated 1.86 million cubic yards of litter from state highways. And that's a trash pile that would be more than 370 times taller than Mount Whitney. It's insane, right? Yeah. So a lot of trash, and those efforts continue. So appreciate everybody doing their part by not throwing stuff out of their vehicles. Okay. So a couple things that are on the statewide level that I just want to highlight. Arriving soon in California, the first zero-emission hydrogen passenger trains in North America. So Caltrans signed a historic $80 million contract with Statler Rail to deliver the first zero-emission hydrogen intercity passenger trains. This is a big deal, and it's for the first 4 train sets, with options for up to additional 25, and these two sets will, or these new sets will primarily operate between Merced and Sacramento and provide connections to high-speed rail when that comes online. And then also, California was selected as a national hydrogen hub, so we'll receive a $1.2 billion grant from the U.S. Department of Energy to accelerate the development and deployment of clean, renewable hydrogen. So the projects will power public transportation, heavy-duty trucks, port operations, and more. So again, a couple exciting developments on the hydrogen front there. That concludes my report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Not a question, but a statement. Lompoc is part of that hydrogen hub success. We are part owners in the Lodi Energy Center, which is one of the Tier 1 projects to convert to hydrogen hub on I-5. So it will benefit us regionally as producing clean energy and reducing our natural gas production. So we advocated for it in DC and pushed to have that done. So I just wanted to plug Lompoc being an advocate for that hydrogen hub. I do have a question on your list of projects. I've noticed recently that the Robinson Bridge project has dropped off the updates as to where it is in development process, and was just curious why, and if it's still being moved forward, because it's normally on the list, and the last two things haven't shown it, and so has me concerned. I'm sure it's still being worked on. I just don't see it on the list.
Are you?
Which is why I'm being very positive and confident. I'm
sorry,
confident
Madam
about
Chair,
it.
I am looking over the list. I thought it was on there,
Yeah, it's mislabeled. Wait.
No, it's not there at all. I literally read line by line to make sure, because it says very specifically where each project is located.
Yeah.
And it is.
Now would be a good time to break it to you.
Yeah, okay, so.
Right? Given how hard we've been working on accelerating this, to suddenly see it disappear from the list.
Yeah, we will double check and triple check on that.
All right.
Thank you for bringing that to us. Our attention.
You're welcome. Again,
You're
last time I
making me
didn't say
nervous,
anything because we were running late, and I was like, it was a mistake.
So if I could attempt a response on this, Madam Chair. So first, we are coordinating that project with the CAPM project now. And so I was quickly trying to scan the list, but I won't spend more time doing that. So we'll make sure it gets on the list for future updates.
Please put it
We
back on the
are
list, yes.
actively continuing to work on the project. It is
See,
important.
I was confident you were. I just need my public to
In
not
fact, I just
panic
sent
like I
a
did.
fact sheet to Supervisor Hartman this last week at her request for information about it, which
Thank you.
provided updated information. I'm happy to send that to you as well.
I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll get it back on the list.
Thank you. All right.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Director King.
Scott, what is the latest update on the rest stops at Gaviota? I know you're probably sick of hearing about that.
Ongoing
People ask me all the
challenge.
time.
Yes.
It's off the list.
So this has been a frequent point of discussion with me and my staff. It has been an ongoing challenge. So, and it looks terrible because it's been closed for such an extended period of time. The reality is it's a whole series of different events that are somewhat unrelated. So first we had a project to close the roadside rest to upgrade the wastewater treatment system, which we did. And then we reopened the roadside rest in December of last year. And then the winter storms hit, and that took out the state park's water supply and their water treatment facility and the road that services it. And so that's also the water supply that we use for the roadside rest. So that closed it until August for us. We had to close it again because we did not have a water supply. Then the state parks was able to complete their work. We received water and then began testing to reopen, and found out that there's some additional problems that we're having once we have the water update again. There's something going on with the wastewater treatment pumps, and we've had to pull the pumps, send them in to be serviced. We're waiting for those to be finished. So it's, believe me, I receive plenty of inquiries on this, and we're doing everything we can, but it's a constant source of like, how do we finish this up? And then just another point on that, because of the emergency work that's happening on the southbound shoulder just preceding the entry to the southbound Gaviota roadside rest, that even when we have everything functioning, we need to complete that work just because of the close proximity of those efforts. It wouldn't be safe to have vehicles trying to exit there at the same time that emergency work is being completed. But that'll happen. That we're working to finish that up late this year, beginning of next year. But as soon as we have the pumps functioning and tested and fully working, then the northbound roadside rest will open.
Did I see? Okay. Seeing any questions out of Santa Barbara?
Yeah, just if you could send me any updates on the 33 to Koyama. I know it's not in your service area, but
yeah,
it's your call.
Yes, just a quick through the chair on that one. They are continuing work. They're anticipating work is continuing into early next year. So major loss of the roadway there. They're putting in a retaining wall system and reestablishing the roadway. But I will, as I have additional reports, I'll send them your way.
Thanks, Scott.
All right. Seeing no other questions or comments, we will move on to item 9. Director Nelson, do you have any CalVan board meeting reports?
Just an ongoing report on the electrification of CalVans. There's as I've mentioned in past meetings, we've purchased 400 conversions of vans, electric vans, and so we're working on the deployment of those. Those are in conjunction with various housing projects throughout the state, and that's what they'll be first be made available for, including Escalante Meadows and Guadalupe. There's a lot of ongoing conversation about whether these will be utilized to the levels necessary to pay for them, because we work on a per mile fee schedule, and if nobody's using them or they're not using often enough, they won't pay for them. And so where there's a lot of concerns about jumping in, this 400 van purchase is increasing our fleet by 50% overnight. So it's a significant contribution to the CalVans fleet. I am already kind of jumping ahead and trying to find out other locations and sources for these electric vehicles in the vans in the future, including maybe working with some of our jurisdictions to maybe to lease those from CalVans. So just kind of put down the radar of other jurisdictions. We have a 6-month commitment with these housing complexes that they'll be used by them, and if they don't use them within a certain amount of mileage, then we're actually able to take them back and then redeploy them to other locations, and I'll be looking for homes for them. It's about 110 mile range, which is one of the big concerns for agriculture at this point, but it might be something that works within this county.
Thank you for that. Director Williams, the Low Sand Board meeting report.
Yes, I already gave that before.
All right.
During one.
Okay. Then we will adjourn until our next meeting on November 16th, 2023. Thank you.